Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, movie review. This is actually one of my scripted movie reviews in which I go back through my old blog archives, dig up old movie reviews I've written in the past and try and make a YouTube video out of it. So I've actually got two posts on this. Right, one is from, I was living in Japan at the time, and at that time, I think they've stopped doing this now, but at that time, all the movies that got released in Japan got released like 2 months late. So I was a big Star Wars fan, so this was like agony for me. The movie came out, Star Wars Episode 3 came out May back in the US. All my friends saw it and were talking about it and writing blog posts about it and stuff like that. And I had to wait like 2.5 months before it came to Japan. So I wrote one post just kind of while I was waiting, talking about my summary of the prequel trilogy so far, and then kind of what I thought would happen in the third movie. And then I wrote a second one after I kind of saw that third movie, actually kind of reviewing it. So I'll read them both. This first one here is written in May at this point. The movie has already come out in the US. All my friends have seen it. But I still haven't seen Episode 3. So I talk about the first two ones. I say, it's not hard to pinpoint where the Phantom Menace went wrong. I'd hardly be the first person to point an accusing finger at Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar Binks wouldn't have been so bad, except from the moment he appeared on the screen, he dominated the whole movie. If he would have just been given a little less screen time, I would have been a lot more forgiving of the Jar Jar Binks disaster. The other big flaw with The Phantom Menace was the action sequences, and that there was a lot of action, but none of it was any good. In order for a good action sequence to work, I think the director has to make you actually believe that the characters are in some sort of danger. Otherwise, you're just watching people jump and swing around the screen, which is about how I felt watching The Phantom Menace. The Attack of the Clones did Phantom Menace 1 better in both respects. The action sequences were more exciting, and Jar Jar Binks was given less screen time. From the reviews I've read of The Return of the Sith, it sounds like Jar Jar Binks has even less screen time in the third one, and the action sequences are even more exciting. So I'll turn my attention to the story instead. Now, again, this analysis is handicapped by the fact that I haven't seen the final chapter. And I'd be interested in the feedback of anyone who has seen it. But without having seen the third chapter, here is what I think the basic problem is. There's just too much ground to cover in the third chapter. The conclusion of the Clone Wars, the birth of the twins, the collapse of the Republic, the transformation from Anakin to Darth Vader, the Emperor kind of getting all deformed, how the twins came to be in kind of two different adoptive homes. All this has to be explained in the third chapter. I'm sure they do a good job of wrapping up all the loose ends. But if I had been in charge of making the Star Wars prequels, I wouldn't have left everything till the last chapter. I mean, think about it. Pretty much nothing of any importance happens in the first two prequels. Those movies could pretty much be erased completely, because it sounds like any event of any importance has all been left to the third chapter. I think I would have introduced the Clone Wars in the first movie, had Darth Vader turn evil in the second movie, And then the third movie could have been about the fall of the Republic and hiding the twins. It seems to me you could tell the story a lot better that way if it was more spread out. And a couple more things that stick in my chaw a bit. The impression I got from watching the original trilogy, and like many people of my generation, I had watched it to the point of memorization, is that Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker were both adults when they met. Obi-Wan tells Luke, "Your father was already an excellent fighter pilot when I met him." I know Lucas tries to get around this by having young Anakin be a child prodigy at race cars and accidentally piloting an X-Wing fighter into victory, but it seems a bit contrived to me. Also, the impression I always had from the original trilogy was Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan had a mentor-tutor relationship. But now, from the prequels, the fact that Obi-Wan had been raising Anakin from a little boy changes that relationship. I guess it still works, but if I had been in charge, I would have had Anakin be a full-grown man when he meets Obi-Wan. I think that would be a lot cooler because, I don't know, I just think that it would have been cooler. It would have been a relationship between two full-grown adults, and it would have had all the complexities as such. Now, when Darth Vader strikes down Obi-Wan in the original Star Wars, it almost seems like patricide. To sum up, if I was in charge of making the prequel movies, and if we could start all over again, introduce Anakin Skywalker as an adult, spread out the important events more, and less screen time for Jar Jar Binks. Okay, and then the second part is after I had seen Star Wars 3 and was kind of reviewing it here. My personal thoughts on Star Wars 3. Lucas is at his best when he is imitating the action serials of the 1940s. He seems to be at his worst when exploring human relationships or character motivations. Excuse me. The original trilogy was highly tilted towards Lucas's strength. The prequel trilogy, being essentially one long attempt at a psychoanalysis of Anakin Skywalker and the question of what makes a good man turn bad, seems to be tilted towards Lucas's weaknesses. Oh, also apparently romance stories are not Lucas's strengths either. The opening sequence of Episode 3, and indeed most of the first half of the movie, is playing towards Lucas's strengths. In fact, dare I say it, the opening sequence is on par with the original trilogy. It's good action-adventure fun with just the right amount of cheesy dialogue to evoke the image of the 1940s serials and the original trilogy itself. General Grievous in particular is a perfect villain. He seems ripped right out of the pulp science fiction of the 1940s or the 1950s. But once the Clone Wars started to wind down and the transformation of Anakin to the dark side began to happen, the movie really began to suck. Did anyone think that the transformation was remotely believable? Does anyone you know ever think to themselves, I'm on the side of good. I'm on the side of good. I'm having a few doubts. Oh, what the hell? I'm just going to be evil for the rest of my life. I mean, it sort of works within the Star Wars universe because we all know that the Star Wars universe is divided into dualist spheres of the light side and the dark side. And in the Star Wars universe, the more nuanced features of human nature don't seem to exist. And we all know the story has to end with Anakin going from one side to the other. But at the same time, that is exactly the problem. This is clearly a story where the plot is driving the characters. And so as a consequence, very few of the characters are believable. In fact, you can almost see the strings of the characters being moved around like puppets controlled by the plot. There are so many numerous, unbelievable turns of events and plot holes. Yoda fails once at fighting the Emperor and then just gives up and goes into exile for the rest of his life. Obi-Wan Kenobi travels all the way to kill Anakin and then doesn't kill him, just leaves him there maimed and half dead. But how could it be otherwise? You need those points set up for the original trilogy. This is the problem with the prequel. You have to move all the characters into position that they need to be when the original story starts. And you can't have them do anything that's kind of organic to their characters. It all has to be a slave to the plot. Now, about the politics of the movie. Maybe this is getting forgotten a little bit nowadays, but there were some veiled references to the Bush administration in the episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. If you're not with us, you're against us type thing. So, about the politics. Being a political animal myself, I appreciate what Lucas was trying to do. And I share his interest in the transformation of a republic to an empire, and his concern that the Bush administration is taking us down that path. That being said, the framework Lucas has set up in his Star Wars universe of the mythological struggle between good versus evil does not lend itself to nuanced political commentary. The whole thing about the dark Sith Lord secretly manipulating events so as to cause the destruction of the Republic seemed a bit silly. By the way, I'm told that the original trilogy was also politically motivated. Apparently it was based on the Vietnam War. The Empire represented the United States, kind of the United States Empire, and the Ewoks represented the Vietnamese. If this is true, this is an interesting little twist on that Star Wars story we grew up with. The story I usually hear is that Star Wars was responsible for remilitarizing the toy industry. After the Vietnam War, most toy companies balked at the idea of war toys. But after the success of the first line of Star Wars toys, the door was opened and G.I. Joe and the rest soon followed through. But if Lucas based his story on the Vietnam War, then did we all grow up playing with toys that glorified the Viet Cong at the height of the Reagan era? At any rate, when the world's largest military travels all the way around the world to bomb a rice field peasant nation into smithereens, perhaps that is a story that does lend itself to being told in good versus evil terms. The fall of a republic, not so much.